So, who is the Antichrist? Where can we find him? Well, I've got a fantastic guest that is going to help us find out. David, how are we doing?
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for having me on, mate. How are you?
Absolutely my pleasure, mate. I'm firing fantastic. It's my default position these days. I'm so excited to have this chat. David, before we go any further, I'm just going to read for our friends at home a little bit about your story. I'm literally going to go off the notes that you gave me so I don't forget anything. Started off down the corporate IT route. Realised shortly after it was a big mistake. Spun out. Had an identity crisis. I think we can all relate to that. Then we're getting on to awakening, broadening out your experience, community, sustainability, social enterprise, martial arts, music, spirituality, substance use. Then you started to notice stark lack of elders. Folks, if you see the thumbnail I've put up today, you probably picked up on the fact we've got a serious lack of leadership on the planet in our culture. Hence your confusion and your lack of direction. You went down a rabbit hole, probably speaking for everybody watching now. Philosophy, psychology, mythology and more. For there to be elders, we need strong leaders. And in order to have those, the general population must be operating at a higher standard. So now you're working with young men, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but we're talking lost young men, we're talking big, heavily tattooed guys with huge muscles that can lift stacks at the gym, but who are essentially lost and don't see a future for themselves. You now step in and you actually guide them through what you call the man stage towards the patriarch stage. So I'm guessing here it's not just about being manly, it's about being that leadership, that father figure. And yes, you talk about Steiner. You talk about Ahrimanic forces. So I'm guessing that's the devil in another connotation. This time, is it Zoroastrian, which goes back to Persia, I believe. And we're also looking at Lord of the Rings. So without further ado, sorry if I've totally slaughtered that, mate, but yes, bloody hell. Let's start with the Antichrist. Is this a person, the devil, or is this metaphor and allegory for the temptation that surrounds us in life and that drags us away from finding our true self?
I know there are people that believe both, and honestly, I haven't made my mind up about that. So I see evil in the world, and that's about as close as I can come to knowing the reality of it. But whether it's an actual individual that's going to incarnate on the earth, I mean, that was Steiner's view in relation to Ahriman and Lucifer many millennia prior to that, and Christ. These are incarnations of highly spiritual beings. Whether or not that happened or not, I don't know. I don't subscribe to either or. I don't know. That's where I am with that.
And so the reason I ask is I really do think I'm not like religious or anything like that, David, and I say this for people at home so they don't get confused here, but when the Bible talks about Sodom and Gomorrah and really, the end of times, And you look what's happening in society, and it's, I mean, to give you an idea, I think the day when I took my baseball cap off on Instagram and people realised I'm a bold bastard, I think I lost like 75 subscribers.
Really?
Doesn't matter the fact that I'm actually tried to be a patriarchal figure. I try to use my experience over 75 countries and through chronic addiction and mental health and recovery and all that sort of stuff to try to help young men, find themselves and get out there and smash it. No, none of that matters. If you're boldy or if you got man boobs, fuck you. So,
yeah.
And so I just think there's that again. There's your devil there. There's your antichrist. There's your all the opposite of that sort of Christic behavior as it's referred to. So the simple life, the being kind, the possessing empathy, the not yearning after material desire, etc., etc., etc. All of that's just wiped out by Instagram, just like that. So I guess that's sort of what I'm getting at. What do you see as problematic in men's lives?
In relation to this idea of Ahriman, the Antichrist, so an excessive focus on materialism, so wealth particularly, over-reliance on technology, the things you've just pointed out, superficiality, right? People are looking at the surface of things and not really going much deeper than that. But all the other catastrophes that are going on in the world that men feel at a loss to know what to deal with, how to deal with it, rather. So economic destruction, the ecological destruction we're going through, and I'm not one of those, throwing paint on a statue sort of people, but I do think that the ecology is breaking down, and social fragmentation as well. These are all massive, massive issues that seem so big that I can imagine a lot of men, some of the men that I'm dealing with, but a lot more that I'm not coming into contact with, are just fucking lost. What do you do about that? It's so big. So that to me is all of the influence of Ahriman, if you want to call it that. This withdrawal from the spiritual. Now, I'm not a churchgoer either. I think that's what you mean by religious, right? If I'm right. But I do believe in there being higher ideals for us to aim for. And I think that is what has been lost massively, particularly in men, but society as a whole. Does that answer your question?
Yes. When I talk about church, the reason I sort of mention that is, well, I can show people who watch my show know that I quite often refer to this dictionary of the sacred languages of all scriptures and myths. Nice. And this talks, this uses the model of sort of planes of existence. So, or I suppose you could also call that like levels of spirituality, which essentially is energy, frequency, and vibration. When people say get your vibe high, they're talking about get more spiritual, isn't it? Stop living in the doldrums. And what the thing there is, you can get so much more from the Bible if you can decode it and you know what it's actually talking about, not what they're going to tell you in church, because albeit well-meaning, and I'm not criticizing church, I think the community of church is wonderful. I love singing songs, and I think vicars, when they're not touching kids, no, I'm joking, but they are lovely people and they mean well, but they don't understand the allegory on which this scripture's founded, and it's phenomenal, and it's exactly you know, sort of helps. Well, it's kind of like what we're talking about here, I guess. So yes, that's what I meant. And when you read the scripture, you know, it all comes down to the basic. It's all the same tenets on which it's founded. So I mean, just a simple example. So you've got Moses with his staff of uprightness. This isn't like a person that walked the planet, although people might believe he is, and that's absolutely fine. This is allegory for, if you live with righteousness, you do the right thing, not the thing that's easy or the thing that fulfills your five senses and occupies your mind for the next 10 minutes. Or if you do the right thing and you live in a frugal way, you trigger your endocrine glands to produce the serotonin and DMT and all these sort of happy chemicals. And in the Old Testament, this is symbolized, if that's even a word, by Moses. So the guy with the staff of righteousness leading the Israelite meaning an awakening person, from Egypt, which if you go to your dictionary is lower self, so beast yourself and animal desires, leading people out of that across the Red Sea, which is symbolic of the serotonin and the DMT, or the Christic, the anointed one, the one that's anointed with the oil of gladness, again the serotonin and DMT, and leads them into the promised land, milk and honey. So again, serotonin and DMT, and this is, you know, I think, sorry, I've lost myself on my own show, but
can I ask you a question then?
Yes, of course.
About the staff. Now, are you suggesting that that's representative of the spine?
It's, I would say it's I mean, yes, it can. If you think about the Kundalini and the secretion that travels the 33 vertebrae, and remember when Moses gets a bazzy on with people, he throws his staff at them and it turns into the snakes. So again, Kundalini symbology. Yes, very much so. Yeah,
and that's the and obviously that's where the fluids that you're talking about are traveling as well, eh? And the spine represents the will to get something done, right? To do something in the world.
Yeah, it's obviously, it's all, even with the dictionaries, a lot of this is open to interpretation. But I mean, you know, you see a lot of young men struggling. You do life coaching, I do life coaching. You do it on a much bigger, I'm guessing, quite a successful scale compared to me. But yeah, I just see people as lost.
Yeah,
I see them worshipping the military, and I just wish they could know the truth about the military, who the military work for, what kind of person joins the military, what the mindset is when you're serving, and you know, and I look at diet, and there's a lot of, I think we're missing out on some. You know, I think we're missing out on some vital health elements there. It's become, you know, we've gone full circle. It's now become sissy again to eat vegetables, where I try only to eat vegetables, and I thrive on it, and I can run 1,000 miles pretty much non-stop by sleeping at the side of the road because of it, and I'm 54 years old. So, sorry, David, I am conscious I'm talking a lot, but I guess I'm trying to just sort of lay the table for where I am, why I thought it would be great to get you on the show.
And I'd like to know more about your story as well. So what brought you to focusing on all of this? Why did you decide to focus in?
So I was a lost young man. You know, I was in a job where I would willingly have gone and killed other teenagers, because somebody told me to, not understanding that person's a banker and they're about profit and da 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 da. I was that wayward and naive, and that took me down a pathway of ego and self-medication through substance. I've got to be careful what I say because we keep getting demonetized, but the older experimenting, and that led me to be chronically mentally unwell on the back streets of Hong Kong, working for the Hong Kong Triads as a doorman in one of their nightclubs, doing such crazy stunts and meeting such serious savage people that it's kind of a bit surprising I'm still here. And that was the exciting bit, David. When I got back to UK, I lived a year and a half of utter depravity and just chronic depression. I didn't know what depression was because no adult had ever explained anything about it to me.
Yeah.
And as I spiraled down, and I'm literally living a life like worse than the film Trainspotting, because in Trainspotting they functioned, right? They functioned and they laughed. That wasn't my life, and it culminated with me waking up one day shivering, freezing, literally starving. I would go without food and sleep for anything up to 9 days at a time, and drink very little in that, drink very little water as well. On one of them occasions, I woke up, I realised I'd crashed out unconscious on the floor again because I was just exhausted. And I wanted to go out of the house and buy what we call in Devon and Cornwall a pasty. It's for our American friends out there. It's a meat and potato pie, and I couldn't go out of the house, Dave. I was too ashamed. I looked at the clothes I was wearing. I'd stolen them off a heroin dealer for a deal that had gone wrong. My shoes were 2 sizes too big for me. I looked like Goofy. I won't even mention the marks up and down my arms. I was ashamed. I'd gone from a 14-stone handsome Marine driving an almost brand new BMW with a mobile phone when people were like, what's that? And okay, this is the material, but I was like 23, for crying out loud. And now, like, whether that be right or wrong, I didn't even have any of it. And cut a long story short, I broke down into what must have been nervous breakdown number 3. And utterly just bawled my eyes out. And in that sadness, I just thought about the little boy that I was and stuff that happened in my childhood that, children shouldn't really experience.
Yeah.
And I asked myself the question, Chris, you could blame adults for that, yeah, okay, but like, who's doing it to you now? Who's sticking that stuff in your arm, 10, 20 times a day? Who's doing it to you? And the only answer I could come up with was me, wasn't it? I was the one hurting myself now, and where had it got me? Where had all this experimenting got me? It started out a bit of fun, back in the dance days, it was great. But now I was ashamed to go out, and I said, right, I'm not going to be the laughing stock, and I pretty much was. I'm going to fix this. I ain't going to go to no church. I'm not going to go to any self-help group. I'm going to fix it. Tomorrow morning when I wake up, well, for a start, I'm going to start, instead of spending all my money on that stuff, I'm just going to spend a tenner a fortnight out of my benefit money. I'll do the acting out bit, they call it in addictive terms. I'll do that, I'll have me high, then I'll crash, and then I'm not spending any more. And when I wake up from that crash, I'm going to throw open them curtains, I'm going to smile at the morning sun, and I'm going to say, morning world, thank you so much for this life. I'm so grateful for it, because a lot of my buddies were dead by this stage, killed in horrible ways, many of them in the Marines. And that was it. And as I thought those thoughts, the light was shining through the blinds, quite sort of, metaphorical, I suppose. And I had me crash. I crashed out. I woke up, and something was different, David. I had the spirit with me. Don't ask me what that. I couldn't explain it to you. It was different.
Yeah.
I was carrying the light. I become a light bearer.
Mm-hmm.
I knew my life would never ever be the same. I no longer would ever be a victim. I no longer ever compare myself to anyone else. And I create my life, my dream life, which turned out to be 75 countries over all 7 continents, achieving every single goal that I ever wanted to do. And ending up with just the most beautiful family, which I don't really deserve, if I was honest. And that was my story. So this is why I'm so big on all this stuff.
Yeah.
Is I was up in my vibration.
Yep.
I was stopping the behaviors which were holding me back. I was refusing to be in victim consciousness. It wasn't, the world didn't do to me anymore. I did to the world. Thank you very much. And gradually, but quite quickly, my life came back to me, David. My friends started to appear. People would say, Chris, come on, we're taking you out for dinner, mate. It's good to see you looking yourself again. I went to Africa and worked with street kids in Mozambique. And I had to train for 6 months at a school in Norway before. And when I hit that school, even though I was on, I never become an angel. I never tried to. I was on a massive come down when I arrived at that school, but it didn't stop me. Just like being the best example I could to people.
Yeah.
I taught them all how to do the endurance course like we did in the Marines. I put them on all through these water obstacles and and all these international students, and they had this fundraising that we had to do. We all had to raise like £3,000. It's about 30,000 kroner for our projects in Africa, and we did it by selling postcards on the street. And the record was at £300 in one day. A friend of mine called JR had managed to sell, and I said, right, I'm going to go and smash that today. And I went out and I sold over £1,000 worth of postcards essentially, and that's why I'm passionate about it. So that's and it. There's so much in there to unpack, isn't there?
Yeah. It's an awful lot. And that's a very powerful story. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Thank you.
And the thing at the end there about taking them through the water obstacles, I think that sort of training massively lacking in just civil society, right? People can go and do the things that you've done once you came out of the military, right? They can join the local clubs, but never to really be put through the paces like you guys were in the military, but in a setting where you're not going to give your way of life for a false cause, right? And I think that's to identify what the cause really should be. That's something I'm really interested in. I don't know. You mentioned Lord of the Rings at the beginning, or maybe we're diverting a little bit from the Antichrist here, but and I don't know what your views are. World War One. Share that in a moment, but I found myself watching the film Tolkien. You seen that?
What's it called?
Tolkien. So it's about the writer of Lord of the Rings.
Ah, okay. No, I haven't seen it, but I will watch it.
Yeah. So he was in the trenches in World War One. He's an officer. And there's a scene in the book. They were all at Oxford, him and his mates, and the news came in that they were going to, the fight the Great War, and they were all so excited, jumping about, really, really, yeah, we're going to be great heroes, we're going to win, all this, and then they just go and chuck themselves in those trenches and just throw their lives away. What was it, a couple of 100,000 in the first few months or something like that? It's disgusting to me, that. And I grew up probably with the same messaging as you, that that was the war to end all wars, was the war for civilization. It was increasingly, and this is probably controversial to some people watching, I'm seeing it more and more as just as being used as pawns for an elite game. That it actually the stakes weren't as high for me and you, average people, as was sold. And I was watching this film at the same time as certain experimental medical products were being rolled out, and it felt like the same situation to me. People believing they were doing good things, putting themselves out to save other people, and destroying their lives in the process. So we are diverting a bit, but this is, yeah, it struck me when you were saying, when you were telling your story there, all of that is it's such a shame. What is the cause? What should we be serving? And it's a really critical question for everyone, I think.
No, I think you're bang on, David, and I think it's exactly the same subject because 11, 11, 11, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Well, in esoterics, 11 is the Antichrist.
Mm.
And there is no war. I mean, there is war, unfortunately, but there is no conflict between man. Okay, petty squabbles and stuff that can be resolved. So we call it the big club, the club that's behind everything. They control everything. You mentioned a medical narrative there. They're mass, and yeah, I mean, I look at those boys in my gym and they're lovely. We all have a sauna at the end of our training and they're all good boys. We all have a chat. One of them said the other day, he said something so powerful. He said, you know what? He said, I know we come here to train and all that. He said, but I really come here for my mental health because having this sauna and chatting to you guys it's a real kind of leveler for me. And and then you look at them lads and they're all probably on their 37th booster or some such craziness. And you think, God, if they declare, if the big club declare another war tomorrow, all you lot are going to go and sign up, aren't you? You're all going to go and be heroes. You're all going to be slaughtered in another sacrifice. And
Yeah, it's sacrifice, isn't it? Yeah, human sacrifice. But isn't that what happens at the end of civilizations? Like the Mayans, was it the Mayans or the Aztecs? They started just chopping heads off every few seconds,
oh gosh, yes. I mean, what is civilization, David? Do you have any thoughts on that? Is this just like a rerun of, does it all like end in Sodom and Gomorrah and then it all starts again?
So I like Plato's version of it, which is that there's a cycle of regimes that we tend to go through. So Plato was around when Greece was multiple city states, and they all had different ways of doing things, more or less. And also in Athens itself, where he was, there was a change of regime, not either during his lifetime or just before, around then. So he'd had a lot of eyes on different ways of running things. As far as he's concerned, there's a cycle of regimes, right? None of them very good. They're a bad bunch of options, but because we're flawed as human beings, that there are better ones and worse ones, but never perfect ones. So right at the bottom is tyranny, where there's one malevolent, powerful ruler, right? But just before that is democracy. And because democracy, as far as Plato and Socrates was concerned, they always degrade into mob rule, and then the mob is much easier to control by the one tyrant who wants to control everything, right? And this is very, when we talk about Lord of the Rings again, we talk about Ahriman, we could be talking about Sauron, who's got the power over all the others who want the power, right? I don't want to go into too much mythology unless your viewers are interested in that. But the tyranny also, happy news-ish, is the tyranny also fails eventually. And then we revert back to the top of the stack, which is aristocracy. Again, not ideal, but the best we're going to be able to manage, I think, given how flawed we are as humans. There's always going to be more to learn, and there's always going to be, the way I see it is there's always going to be tiers in society. It's just what quality are the people going to be in those tiers. So you've got essentially the peasantry, which is most of us, right? Then above that, you've got a nobility class, elite. And then above that, you've got a clergy class. So I relate that to these stages of manhood I was talking about. So man stage being the peasantry, the noble being the patriarch, and then the elder being the clergy. Ideally, you want the peasants to be doing the graft and making sure the whole thing works. You want the nobles to be noble and leading well, balanced and noble people with ethics and morality. And then you want the clergy to be wise, and that's the whole thing. Then if they're informally leading, they're giving the guidance to the nobles, then we're leading from wisdom instead of egotism and base materialist desires, which is where we are now, right? Or so it seems. The point there, I've lost the thread of that. Yeah.
Well, I can come in there if you want, because this is a brilliant book.
You got.
You think I'm a library here, right? All these recommendations. The Babylonian Woe. In fact, look, I've just got a button on my screen I can push. This sums up what you're saying perfectly. So, in the times of old, society was exactly what you said. You had clergy, you had the religious class. Their job was to look after the people. I'm guessing from a spiritual, perspective.
Yeah.
Then you had the kings and queens. Their job was to love their people and do anything for them. And then what happened is, and then you had the system of finance, which, let's just say, for example, it was the cockle shells. People would say, listen, you come round, you paint my fence, David, but I can't paint your fence because I'm busy or whatever. Look, I'll give you 2 cockle shells, and this is nothing about money or profit or interest or nothing. It's just symbolic of the job you've done for me. So painting a fence is worth 2 cockle shells. Doing a whole house, we'll call that 5. You can then take that to any city, town, village, even the next country over, and that is recognised that, or that will get you 1 sheep.
Yeah.
And then what happened is you had the Babylonian Woe. You had these Babylonian money magicians. Well, this is where money magic started, that came in and said, well, listen, why don't we change it from a simple system of exchange to one of greed and profit and power? We'll start to lend people the cockle shells, but when they pay them back, they got to pay it back with interest. This is your usury, isn't it? And they conducted their business from the basements of palaces and churches and dirt. And over time, and this is just so obvious to see now in our days now of Sodom and Gomorrah, is they totally changed these rulers from being benevolent, for the people, to how much gold have you got in your cellar, because that is the mark of you, and it's I mean, even to the fact now our kings and queens wear gold hats and carry gold orbs and live in just lavish castles worth billion. The real estate is billions.
Yeah.
So, yes, that kind of ties in with what you were saying.
Yeah, indeed. So it's whether we can change the quality of that nobility, those kings and queens with all the gold in the cellar, right, to being less about the material, more about the spiritual, but not too much about the spiritual. And this is where Steiner is really interesting to me as well, because he doesn't say elevate yourself and just go for spirituality, because he's got a spectrum of reality. So imagine an equilateral triangle, right, with the point at the top. One side of the spectrum, you've got the devil of materialism, which is Ahriman. I think he's known as Mephistopheles in other stories, right? And you mentioned some Iranian mythology there as well. And then the other side of the spectrum, you got the devil of spiritualism, which is Lucifer. And they're both extremes. You go to either side too far, then you're out of balance. Whereas you consider the third point in the triangle to be Christ, right? And that's where you're playing these two forces off against each other. Whereas the church will say, stay away from the devil, he's evil, it's bad, don't go anywhere near that. And then you don't. In Carl Jung's sort of idea of the shadow, if you're not keeping an eye on them, then you can't see what they're doing, and they're going to play out through you, right? So the material. So imagine the academic person, right? And there's so many of these, right? They're just writing books, they're writing articles, they're writing papers and things just to get them published to make some money, and they go on a shelf and they never get read by anybody. What a waste of life that is, right? So that's somebody who's stuck in the material. And then somebody who's stuck in the spiritual. Well, I think your 60s hippies just floating around on the hillside with daisies in their hair, absolutely detached from material reality, right? And so in effect, totally ineffectual. So the way to balance these off against each other, according to Steiner, is you've got to use your Ahrimanic rationality to critically analyze your ideas to make sure that they're actually going to work in the real world. And at the same time, the work that you do in the world needs to be inspired, spiritually inspired. And if you do that, then you're playing Ahriman and Lucifer off against each other, and you are being the representative of humanity, which is that Christ third point. That's according to him. Yeah, I find that fascinating.
Fascinating again then is yes, those a lot of this is so interrelated, isn't it? It's like when you see the Masonic pillars, the sun and the moon, you know, the electro and the magnetic. Then you look at Kabbalah and you see the three pillars of Kabbalah, and essentially it's all getting to what you say, that you've got the devil on the one hand, which is your ultimate badness and, you know, sinning against God, universe, nature, whatever, and then you've got Lucifer on the other hand, representative of the light and righteousness, although that's going to sound a bit strange to people.
Both devils. So what he's saying is both devils, both bad if you do too much.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you for correcting me. That's it. And then you've got the middle path, the Moses with his righteous stick path.
Correct.
But this is where it gets clever. Is when you see the depiction of Jesus on the cross, and he's got these two bad boy thieves, wasn't it? He was crucified with. And one of them always has his head turned away from Jesus, and one of them is looking. And that, again, it's the same thing. It's the three pillars. And it's saying that the one looking away, that's your total evil. But to the other side of the coin, being too much of a bloody do-gooder, but if you're going to be one of them, be the bloody do-gooder, and that's represented by the guy accepting of Jesus. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, it's just saying, like, you know, they're both, you got to find the middle path in life. So it's not about being evil. It's not about being so bloody kind and do-goody. It's about finding that middle way. But if you are going to go to extremes, be the kind, do good extreme.
Well, I don't know. I would say not in Steiner's frame, not to do that. I mean, I didn't know that. I didn't know about the guys looking in those directions. So yeah, I think from my understanding, then the guy looking away from Christ is the guy looking to Ahriman and the material, right? Nothing spiritual about my life. Don't want to have anything to do with it. The guy looking toward him is being excessively spiritual. He's putting Christ on a pedestal instead of recognizing the spiritual nature of himself, right? Sounds like. But Christ is the middle path there, which is to take the burden onto yourself and to lift the world up, eh? That I am not a biblical or Christian scholar, and I don't understand all that so well, but that's how I read that image that you just painted. It was quite clear in my mind there when you said it. But also coming back to what you said about the staff, if that is the spine, another thing that Steiner says, and he's done this amazing, massive sculpture of this whole Lucifer and Ahriman thing. Lucifer is depicted with his spine, you know, like bent back, like too open, like this, like stretched back, you know, bent in an unnatural position, whereas Ahriman is like down and gripped in like this. He's sclerotic, right? His curved the other way. And just to bring Lord of the Rings in again, you can see that Ahrimanic, that whether it's the Antichrist or not, but that extreme materialist thing in Gollum, where he's over the ring, which is like this thing of power and, you know, control. And he's literally wrapped around the bloody thing because he's so enamored by it, you know. So that's that that influence actually pulls, and you see people walking around whose spine, they've just given in. To me now, knowing more about Steiner, that's just they focus too much on the material through their lives, and they've just contorted downwards like that. Frail elderly folks who've got hunchbacks, it's because they focus too much on that and not enough on that. Anyway, side note, but
The thing is, though, we can come up with these side notes, David, and even though we might be coming from different areas of research, we're on that same wavelength where we both get it. How are young people? I mean, I get a lot of comment, well, not a lot, but you get the occasional comment on this channel. I used to love this channel when you used to chat to military heroes, and which is one of them, what's the word, contradiction in term things, and it was like, no, I took my channel this way because I saw how all those heroes behaved during COVID,
right,
and what they was willing to do to the children, and even the ones that that had a platform, just they all shut up and counted the money in their bank account. And there's no criticism of them, David, because that would be judging other people, isn't it, rather than getting our own house in order. But I no longer wanted to sell that lie that there's anything heroic in being in a job where you massacre other kids because the European banking aristocracy tell you to, so that they get even more powerful. I want to teach true heroism, if that's even a word, which everyone can do, and they can start today. It's called doing the right thing, and I don't always do it. I struggle massively,
So how do you identify what the right thing is? That's the trick.
Yes, so you identify it by, I would say it, and I might be sort of mixing stuff up here, but when they talk about Holy Ghost, to me, that's just your conscience. You know when something's, well, you don't always, but when you know something is right, then it becomes a dilemma, doesn't it, whether you go against it. I know that, say, this afternoon, let's just say an old acquaintance popped by and they had a little bag of stuff and were like, Chris, do you want some of this? I know, David, everything in my mind, all my psychology is going to come in and go, yeah, go on, Chris, it's just a one-off, just imagine the feeling, the escape, the release. But I know, sis, I know that's not the way. And I know it's not going to be that pleasure trip that I think it is. And I know tomorrow I'm going to pay massively. And it's that thing, it's the knowing, it's developing that knowing. I didn't always have that, as I explained earlier. I used to think that way was the only way I wanted to be in life. Let's bloody get off my head at every single opportunity. Way better than living a bloody normal life and all the stresses and strains and nonsense. And I think it's the same, it's the same with spirituality. You just develop this way of knowing.
Yeah.
And you find yourself criticizing someone, and you're like, rein it in, pull yourself back. Well, who are you to criticize that? That's not your job. Your job's to get your house in order, because the answers, everything comes from within. And then, like, I physically know now with what I eat and what I put in my body, what makes me feel nice, light, full of energy, vibrating, happy, and what is like stodge and what slows me down, and so when you said, how do you know, I think this is what gnosis is. It's just the knowing, you know, and but you can't explain it to someone that hasn't walked that path, and not that you need to, but
Well, well, that's so. Socrates lived and died by that voice. You know, do you know the story of Socrates? What he was about?
please tell us. I'm fascinated.
So he was the he was called. It was in the time of, when there was oracles, right, and all the rules would go to the oracle to ask for guidance on what decisions to make, right. So the women who were just like on psychedelics,
David,
dancing
can I
around.
just say, when you see me looking over here, I'm just getting the comments in the chat up.
Cool.
I'm not ignoring you. So if you just could say that again.
Yeah, yeah. So back in ancient Greece, there was a long period where they had oracles that they went to for spiritual guidance, right? So there was these, from what we can tell, typically drugged up on hallucinogens, young women who were sort of governed by old men. Sounds really fucking seedy, doesn't it? But anyway, that was going on, and the rulers went to these young women to get their advice on what decisions they should make and how they should move their countries forward and their businesses forward and all that. And Socrates was like most men at the time in Athens. He'd served in the military. He was just a citizen. They had slaves, so they were the sort of the elevated class. They were the nobility class, if you like, that we've been talking about. And they spent a lot of time sitting around and thinking. And one day, word came back from the oracle that she'd said Socrates is the wisest man in Athens. At that time, Athens was the center of learning, really, in the classic world. So to say that, to me, means he was the smartest man in the world, the wisest man in the world, right? So he was like, really? Well, look at me. I'm just, an ordinary guy, and there's all these people with loads of money and power, and they seem to know something. So let me go and talk to them and find out whether this is true. So he went around and he asked them a load of questions, and just through reason, always got to the bottom of them not really having a fucking clue what they were talking about, because they just kept giving answers and answers and answers, and then he would just keep questioning and probing, and they'd run aground eventually. And so he realized actually he was the smartest man in Athens, because he realized that he knew nothing and everybody else thought they knew something, right? So that's why he was the smartest man in Athens. But he was a very interesting character, because then he just went on his whole life asking people, and they called him like the gadfly. He was a pain in the ass because he would just keep asking you questions until you made yourself look stupid, right? so he just kept doing that, and he was known well for that. And when it came to his conscience, there's a story of him where he developed this. We don't know, right? There's stories where he's like this semi-mythical sort of heroic character, watching the Spartans blockade and burn Athens to the ground for months and months and months. People starving, dying, disease, all sorts. And he just used to stand on a cliff top observing all of this for hours, for days. 24 hours, no sleep, just stand there day and night. And the story is that something clicked in him, and he broke through something, maybe a mental blockage, into hearing this voice, developing this gnosis that you're talking about, I think. And he called it his daemon. People called it the conscience. Christians would call it the guardian angel. I think it's all the same idea. And this to tell him what the right thing is to do, and every single moment. And then, like you say, you got that dilemma: you're going to listen or not. But he listened to it every single time he lived his life that way, up until his death, where it told him that he should submit himself for execution because that was the right thing to do. This is the story. And he did. And because he'd been so big on questioning the stories of the gods and making the youth question the authorities, because who are all these people who have power and don't really know anything, he was accused of corrupting the youth, for getting to think for themselves. And so a court of his peers put him in a room and said, right, we're going to sentence you to execution. And he could have argued his way out of it, but he chose, because his daemon told him to, he chose to accept the punishment. So he lived and died by it. So that conscience, absolutely critical as far as I'm concerned. I'm bang on with you there. And that's how we know the right thing to do. Yeah. But then you've got the Ahrimanic voice there, the Sauron voice there, the whispers of the ring telling you, go and have a line, go and have a smoke or something. It's always there trying to pull you down into it. The Steiner's view is that the Ahrimanic force wants to encase you in matter, bring you down into the earth and trap you there. Whereas the Luciferic wants to pull you off the earth out into the stratosphere. And it's interesting, you can hear that in the culture now, those two narratives. There's too many people on the earth. Well, who's going to die then? That's the Luciferic thinking. They want to get the souls off the earth, potentially. Whereas the Ahrimanic is the one that's growing, and Elon Musk, for example, is a big name for this, is no, we need to be having more kids, more souls on the earth, get them down on here, right? So yeah, those two forces, I see that playing out everywhere now. Just having learned a bit about Steiner, and you know, it sort of it forms a lens for you, doesn't it, when you start to read into these things? Yeah, see it everywhere. But yeah, coming back to your point, conscience, I think is the only way we can live, and it often brings uncomfortable consequences, doesn't it?
Yes. And fascinating conversation, by the way. So when people talk in terms of the Antichrist, and it is kind of funny, but well, I mean, interesting. I mean, because I think some people really believe it's going to be the manifestation of the devil in a person. But what we're more talking about in this conversation is it's everyone has the ability, don't they, to manifest an antichrist, anti-Christian behaviour. And when I say Christian, I'm not talking about being like a do-gooder and drinking wine and that sort of stuff. I mean, you know, Christ, meaning the ancient Greek, the chrism, the anointed one, the one that's learnt to live simply and without judgment, and therefore their endocrine glands produce the serotonin and the DMT, and yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? Free will. Do we have free will? Because I know all this stuff, David. I know it all. Bloody hell, it doesn't make it easy though to. You know, they call it a spiritual battle for a reason. You have to fight it every day. You have to fight it for that extra cream cake at lunchtime, the bloody glass of wine in the evening, the bad mouthing, catching yourself bad mouthing people, the gluttony, the sloth, the you know, which is what your Netflix, isn't it? And you, not that there's nothing wrong with watching a bit of Netflix, but it's hard, and we're having this conversation. We understand it, or we're at least on a level where we can interpret it. And I mean this not disrespectfully, but 99.9% would have no clue what we're talking about.
No.
Literally would be like, what are these guys on about? Why would you not want to go to the gym, pump weights, get huge, tattoo your body head to toe, bloody get the Netflix on, innit? Get the pizzas in, get the bloody beers in, go and fight because the military's good, innit? You know, I'm sorry, I'm being a bit facetious or a bit disrespectful, but I'm just trying to make my point that this is why I truly believe the battles with it. You can set a good example. Okay, so during that medical narrative, you know, when people were getting locked in the home prison for anything up to 2 years, I was part of something called the Global Veterans Alliance. And it was such a learning curve in itself, because I was always sort of, guys, this is a spiritual battle. They're controlling people through fear. They're keeping people in a low vibrational state. You've got to see that. If you don't see it, you can't fight the battle. You know, what was it that Sun Tzu said? You know yourself and know your enemy. Then in 1,000 battles you can never be defeated. You know, he knew it. That guy knew it, you know. And the kind of response was, nah, not all that religious, spiritual shit. Nah, we're going to go bloody, you know, when we're going to go and smash them, Chris, and take them down. And I was like, don't you understand, like, violence begets violence? Don't you understand that if you overthrow the government with everyone living in a low vibrational ego state of being, within 3 weeks, guess who's going to be in your government? It's going to be, you know, this great example is Cuba. You know, Che Guevara and Fidel Castro had all these like ideals, and they overthrew, was it Batista, the American puppet at the time. I've even seen photos when I was in Havana of Che Guevara smoking his cigar in the, you know, in the big plush hotel in Havana, and what happened is, within a short space of time, Fidel just become the new Batista. People would argue with that, and I don't mean to be disrespectful. I'm just saying, when I was there, people would go, they wouldn't say his name. They'd say this one. That's Fidel, folks, by the way. They say he sends a taxi around all the big hotels every night after they've done their take-ins, and they have to get a big percentage of their money and shove it in a taxi. So, yes, this is what we're getting at. And sorry, just to round up my point is, bloody hell, you know, you got people out there that they don't want to be told what to eat. They don't want to be told how to behave. They don't want to be told how to, you know, what to do. And fine, I'm literally not saying you should. I'm saying you got to work it all out. You got to work it out for yourself.
Yeah.
And if you want answers, you can seek out people that have got them, and then you're receptive, aren't you? So you'll listen and probably take heed and put them into action, and hopefully see some improvements. But I do wonder if, you know, this is the end of times. I like to be positive and say it's not, but does it even matter if it is? If we're all just energy, vibration, and frequency, we're a manifestation of the quantum realm. Does it really matter what happens? I don't know.
Well, it's out of our control either way, right? Control the controllables.
I don't know. Do we? I mean,
as individuals, I can't make the American government fail, right? I haven't got that level of control. You see what I mean? So what can I control? Well, I can, to your point, get myself in good shape. I can learn to think for myself. I can build strong relationships around me. I can try to identify the good voice and the bad voice so I can listen to the good voice more and do more purposeful things in the world, right? These are all things we can all do at all times. And maybe that'll lead to bigger things. Maybe that'll lead to building communities and political parties. Maybe, you know, it's as long as we're following that conscience, then really what we do is up for grabs. We're all different. We're all unique individuals, right?
Absolutely.
So the world, is it ending? I'm inclined to say yes, personally, but I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing.
So let's come on to your work then, David, because you're clearly doing some good work. I've got your website up here. What's a typical? Give a sort of typical scenario then of a when a man comes to you. What are they suffering from? What's their experience?
Is there a typical scenario? Is the question. Well, oftentimes it's addictive issues. So, and that's a broad thing, right? It's not necessarily substances. It could be porn. It could be social media. It could be working too much. Whatever it is that they're doing to take themselves out of their own lives, often they've already become receptive to the fact that they need to sort that out, and they just want somebody to be there along for the ride to keep them accountable to that. Oftentimes, right? I'm sure it's the same for you. We are an addicted culture in every form, right? All the material ways that we could be addicted. So that's one-to-one a lot of the time. But increasingly, and what I'm really interested in is the group side. And this is what, to me, the military should provide. And I know it does to a degree, but again, for a false cause, perhaps now. It creates a sense of brotherhood, shared mission, right? And I would love to hear your view on that and what your experience was with that. But I think that's a huge need, because we've become so disconnected from each other in our culture, and ourselves, obviously, but from other people as well. We used to live in small communities where there was a survival imperative, right? And we had to pull together in order to make sure that we had enough food to eat, right? We had to get into the fields at a certain time of year to make sure the bloody food was harvested. But now, because we're so bloody looked after and comfortable, that survival imperative has seemed to have gone away. It's just been dealt with somewhere else, so we don't have to look at it. But it's going to come back. So I'm really interested in building relationships between people now, community building, so that they've got that to rely on, that support network when the time comes, and it will, I think. But yeah, I would love to hear, if it is the right segment to do it, I'd love to hear your experience of building brotherhood and that camaraderie in the military.
Gosh, probably doesn't come in the form that people think.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just get a few things clear about the military. So, talking generally now, people are joining up for an ego trip, aren't they? That it's their ego wants to prove itself by wearing a special coloured hat and having a row of medals to show what a heroic person you are, and this kind of, this is the way it's sold, isn't it? And this guy's behind enemy lines and he's not afraid to, and he's got all these kung fu skills and he's a marksman, and that appeals, that proving yourself, passing out with, say, the Britain's elite forces is it's looked up to and it's admired because it's hard. It's not as hard as addiction, but it is fairly hard. And so immediately there, you've got a culture of people in what you could say is a low vibrational state. You're not all up in the morning hugging each other and, deciding how can you repaint the church. Although I'm not saying that the military don't do some wonderful, humanitarian work. And this isn't a criticism of people. I met some really fantastic people in the Marines, really just good people. But the outcome's never going to be good, is it, for a whole group of people all in the ego state, i.e. not, that are still living in that materialistic realm where you think that causing physical damage to another person or group or community or country is in somehow going to get you a good result. Mm-hmm. And I think what does get shown through the military, if you look at the chap, what was his name, that wrote, I think he wrote The Perfect Storm. He wrote a book. I think it might actually have been called Tribe or something. It was he embedded himself with a platoon of U.S. Marines. I think it was in Afghanistan on some hilltop. Really like facing off with the quote unquote enemy. His name's on the tip of my tongue, but anyway, he was fascinating. He asked the question, why is it that men would rather be in war with all the horror and the depravity and the lack of basic creature comforts like a shower and a kettle to boil yourself a cup of tea, and he came up with the idea that I think the answer was that it gives people a sense of tribe. Mm-hmm. It gives people that community that society doesn't provide. It gives broken young men, who many of us, as I've probably gathered from my history, was quite a broken young man. I didn't think that. I didn't think I was any different from any other person. But when you clearly look at the amount of stuff I imbibed into my body, then there's something wasn't, quite the same. Yeah. And so family, community, sense of purpose, and adrenaline rush, isn't it? Adrenaline rush. Mm-hmm. The day that the guy behind me got shot 3 times and then the gunman turned his sights on me, bloody hell, that's one of the most best fun days I think I've ever had on the planet. It's brilliant. It's like, it's like a theme park that you don't have to pay for. It's a crap analogy, but
maybe with your life.
Yeah, it's just phenomenal. And we had one chap got shot dead, and that was just collateral. I'm not saying obviously I'm pleased about it, or that he wasn't a super chap, but that that's what we signed up for. We signed up for the danger and the and signed up for lots of different sort of stuff. But so you've got that. So when you've got young people that really that lifestyle suits them, it suits where they are in their head, then it's bloody dangerous, isn't it? Because any bloody banker who want to create the next war with their events where certain buildings fall out the sky, they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable individuals. They're not well-rounded. They're not balanced. They're seeking, aren't they? And it becomes dangerous, because then you've got this whole swathe of odd and essentially angry young people that are just going to get out to prove their worth, and they don't really care about the facts and the reality, and they certainly haven't read any books about it. Becomes dangerous. In addition, there's other factors that don't get mentioned. So if this is such a wonderful fraternity, family, I'll say fraternity, I mean there's obviously women in the military, but just take your typical scenario. Well, if it's that brilliant, why are the statistics of people who take their own lives the highest in the veterans community? And before anyone goes, oh, that's because they've seen horror. No, there tends to be people that didn't even see combat.
Yeah.
The people that I come across that approach me. I was doing life coaching one day with someone. I'll try and be a bit anonymous here, but he was like, yeah, can you help me, Chris? I'm like, yeah, sure. Well, what is it? He was like, Afghanistan. I'm like, oh, right. So I guess you saw a bit of action. No. Oh. Well, but I mean, you were like, behind enemy lines, were you? No, I was a chef. I was like in the safe area. Okay. You got bombed. Was it IED? No, we didn't even, nothing like. Well, what happened? Oh, I got assigned to a unit. I had to go and cook them some soup. It was some unit. I'm not laughing at the guy here. I'm just laughing at the strangeness of it. And he said they'd had a chap killed the week before. So obviously units in Afghanistan, if they're in the observation bases, the four FOBs, they're going to have people killed, aren't they? They're right, literally, they're right out there. And
yeah.
So the whole thing of this guy was that he'd been to a base, and the people on that base, they'd lost somebody the week before. And I was just like, I'm trying to unpick this, David. What there's clearly something else going on in this scenario, isn't it? I'd wager alcohol is probably the reason why your missus has told you to go and get some life coaching or get some help. I'm guessing childhood trauma. So sorry, I've kind of gone off on one there, but there's just there's just so much more. The military's not the brilliant experience that I think civilians think it is, no. but it can be, and one person's experience can be so different for another.
Yeah,
My
sense is that there's deep bonds that are formed, though. Is that correct?
The honest truth. I think there were. I didn't experience it. I found that I didn't experience it. I felt quite let down, really, by a lot of the blokes. If I was honest, I thought they was a bit gutless.
Right.
I thought they was easily swayed.
Mm-hmm.
People would kind of like turn a blind eye to stuff so long as they were accepted by the crowd.
Right. This is why you were in.
Say again.
This is why
Yeah. I mean, an example of that. I mean, right from the word go. I mean, day 2 in training, I was looking for my denims. That's your green trousers, right? Like they weren't in the drying room where I hung them up, and so I went round all 50. I think we joined up with 56 people. I think there were 4 empty beds because 4 people hadn't got off the train. So I think there was about 52. And I went round every bed space, just, looking for my denims. And finally, I seen them hanging up. And I went like that, and it's got THRALL written in the hem. I'm like, mate, why did you steal my fucking trousers? And the guy's looking like, well, he done it because he'd rather steal from me and get me in the shit than admit that he'd lost his own. And that can happen with weapons, David. I've seen that happen with weapons. I've seen, one scenario where one Marine had fallen out with another. So we went into his, and this is during active service. This was in Northern Ireland, and he went into his room, or grot as we called it, and he cocked the guy's weapon and clipped the safety catch off. And luckily the guy come back and spotted it. He's like, fucking hell. Someone had hated him that much. He was just hoping he was going to have a negligent discharge, basically. Didn't care whether he killed someone in the room or not. He just, And if you look at, Vietnam, fragging was where if your officer dissed you, and you remember, you're an ego state. You're in ego state. You've probably been through all kind of untold abuse as a youngster. You ain't going to get no hoity-toity officer making you look stupid in front of everyone. And what they do is they just go up to their tent in the middle of the night and roll a grenade underneath it. So a lot of stuff in the military just doesn't get talked about, David, It doesn't. I'm not saying this happens on like a grand scale or anything, but it does go on. You get bullies, you get nasty people, you get, back in my day, obviously race was quite a sort of big thing in 80s Britain, 80s and 90s. So it's
I think that sense that I have, that may or may not be true based on your experience, then is what a lot of people feel, and possibly one of the reasons that a lot of people join up, because they're feeling that they want to be part of that tribe, like you said, eh? What I would like to offer instead is something where they don't have to go and sacrifice their life for a false cause. But they can have that camaraderie, that brotherhood, and actually do something real in the world, first and foremost in their own house. Like you said, get your own house in order. So I think, it's everything with the systems now is just perilous, isn't it? Corrupted.
I think people are touching on that, though, because you've got these people are offering now special forces experiences, aren't they? So civilians don't have to go and join up, but they can go and see if they can complete some of the tests.
Right.
Obviously they're never going to be to the level that the elite forces do, and that's not the point. The point is there's a lot of people that, it's just crazy. One of the biggest things I get is, hi Chris. Well, I was never in the military. And I'm like, well, why are you telling me that? You're so brainwashed and indoctrinated by the military industrial complex through the media that is all the same club own everything. They've brainwashed you into thinking if you haven't been in the military, you're a lesser person. Whereas if you listen to the experience I just told you, you realise might even be a better person than your typical military, your typical squaddy. I'm just sort of putting it out there, David, and some or people will say, yeah, Chris, I got to week 22 in Marines training and like an idiot I left. I've regretted it every single day since. I'm like, well, don't. You could have passed out, gone to the Northern Ireland conflict like our lad did and got shot dead after a week. You could have had kids who never got to see their father for 8 months a year, that grew up incredibly damaged and needing therapy or taking substances for a good part of their life. Do you know what I mean? It's like, just live your life, create your life, be happy to be here. Mm-hmm. Aspiring to like be like other people is an ego trap, is it? Is it not?
Yeah, indeed. You got to be like yourself. However, I still think there's a place for that group, right? To try and strike the balance between the individual and the society, I think it's really hard. Like, I look around, what institutions do you feel like you want to support these days? Like, what institutions are actually on our side? I would love to get behind British institutions, because I know by doing that, the idea is by doing that, then there's a feedback loop to my own family, my own community. But I don't think any of these institutions speak for me now at all. This is part of the whole thing. It's becoming too centralized and ideological, and it's going to fall. It has to fall. I'm not one of those people that wants to tear anything down. I just think it's inevitable at this point because it's so far gone. So yes. To me, all of this is just preparing. All like the talk of the Antichrist and Ahriman, all this is all coming in. It's all happening, whether it's just within ourselves or whether there's something external. It's not really the point. There seems to be a phenomena of corruption, of greed, of lower, baser impulses ruling, right? So what do we do about that? We've got to be light bearers, like you say. We've got to lift ourselves up and hopefully the people around us. And if we can keep lifting ourselves up, then the ripple effects get bigger and bigger, eh? And then when it does come down, at least we're not going to be just swimming in the shit with everyone else. We will be the leaders then.
What can we suggest then, David? Let's round this one up. I've put all your links below this video, by the way. So for anyone out there, do you only deal with men, which is fine? I'm just asking.
You used to work with women as well, but I find that they just don't respond very well to my level of feedback. I can be quite blunt and direct, and I find that works very well with men. So yes, focus on men.
Yes. Telling someone they got a fat ass is it's never going to go down well, mate.
Doesn't go down well, no.
That's basic lesson number 1 for any man. Don't talk about nothing. No, what was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, I'll go first. Be honest with yourself. I think one of the reasons I've done well is when I got addicted to stuff, like I was just honest about. I'm like, I've got a problem here, haven't I? I didn't try to hide. I didn't give a shit what anyone else thought. I'm on this is my life, my mad mental existence, and I'm going to live it any which way I choose. Thank you very much. And there were times where I got self-conscious, I suppose you could say, when you're a disheveled wreck of a person. But I just say, be honest. Be honest with yourself. That would be my first point.
As advice, as points for people to take away from the
yeah. I mean, I'll give you another example. Turn off the mainstream media, folks. Stop it. Strictly Come Dancing. What? You're a bloke and you watch and you wonder why your life isn't going.
Yeah.
You're a bloke and you watch the BBC News and and you wonder why your life isn't panning, why you're not happy.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that I've watched documentaries, some fascinating stuff out there. Read books, listen to audiobooks. Mm-hmm. But, When you put that box on in the corner room, that's just a big club laughing at you as they program you with their utter bloody nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Well, the overall thing is to know thyself, isn't it? I think that's the best advice I can give. How you do that is another matter.
Would you say take action? If you
take the right action.
Yeah.
Well, you made the point. Take the right action. But again, you got to be able to know what that is. You got to hear the right voice. And if we take Steiner's frame that there's the excessively spiritual voice and the excessively material voice, then you've got to listen out for what's sort of about the middle path, the balance point between that. So yeah, take right action. Yeah.
I say that because sometimes you wake up and the world isn't the way that you want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And they're those mornings where you just want to roll over and hit the snooze on the alarm.
Mm-hmm.
Try to sleep yourself into a bit more oblivion. Then you're getting up late. Then you go into coping strategies like shitty, high, stodgy carbohydrate food and buckets of coffee to get you. And it's horrible. And I know what that's like because I've lived like that. Or you can say, no, right, I'm going to be strict.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get up. I'm going to smile at the morning sun. I'm going to say, thank you, Mother Nature, for giving me this life. I am grateful. Make your bed. Easy to do. First win of the day. It shows that you have the power. You can take action. You just made your bed. A lot of people won't do that. Get out, get some air in your lungs. Walk around the block. Look at the birds. Look at the sun coming up. Be proud that, you're up before everyone in your street. You're investing in your life. Hot shower, cold shower. Get the old vagus nerve stimulated like when we lived in the forest for millions of years. We get wet, then we get dry, then we get wet and cold, then we get dry. And the body's so clever, it incorporates that into you, Look into fasting. You're never going to get a better buzz than on the third day of a water fast. Bloody hell. Talk about coming closer to God.
Yeah.
Then, and here's the thing. All them things I just said, and 5 minutes meditation in the afternoon, even if you can just go, right, I'm going to shut all the noise off now. I'm not living in the past because it doesn't exist. I'm not living in the future. I'm just going to be quiet here now. I'm grateful. You've taken action. You've owned it. You've raised your vibration. You're going to get a better result. And that's why I say, take action. That's what I did, I could have stayed in that squalor. Wouldn't be here now, would I really? Let's be honest. I would have died a long time ago of some sad, tragic way. But you take action. For people listening, you could contact David. See what he has to offer. I'm sure he's going to, be very upfront and forthcoming and not going to pressure you. I'd say that. I'd say, yes. Am I making sense, David? Sorry, I'm waffling a lot in this podcast.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Better to do something than nothing and just to be paralyzed and lying in a pit of your own filth, right? You've got to do something, even if you're not. I'm going back to my point of do the right thing. If you don't know what the right thing is and you're just lying around, paralyzed, do something. Definitely.
Absolutely. So people can get hold of you through your website.
Yep. Go to the website. You can look on YouTube. I reluctantly used Instagram, but it's there if anybody's interested in looking at a few interesting tiles. Yeah. All good.
Yes, brilliant. David, been an absolutely super chat. Please come back on the show because, these are the chats that I just think are valuable,
Yeah, we barely scratched the surface of a lot of these things.
Oh, absolutely. Even the notes the bullet points you very kindly put together, we didn't hardly touch on. But and we could chat for ages now. The problem is people's time being precious. If they look at a 3-hour podcast, they're like, oh, I'll watch that later. And of course, the later never comes. So I think we're just better to cut this one here and then do another one. So friends at home, let us know what you think. Are we making sense? Do you think taking action's the way? Do you think getting over your material self is the way? Let us know your thoughts. If you could like and subscribe, that'd be absolutely wonderful. Click the notification bell. Massive thank you to everyone that supported the channel for $1.99 a month through Patreon, or become a YouTube member, or if you want the esoteric stuff. In fact, David, have you got another 10 minutes?
Yep. Good.
Then I'm going to invite you to our locals platform. It's an uncensored platform, so we can just go over and say what we think. But friends, thank you to everyone that supported us on locals as well. That's where it's at. If you want the truth in life, you've got to get off YouTube, unfortunately, because it's too heavily censored. So
yep.
That just leaves me to say massive thank you to everybody in the chat. Massive thank you again to David. And look after yourself. Much love.
Thank you, Chris.
Welcome.
Cause I've been living life right like I could just die any